This week's video is going to be all about how to draw a portrait. I've been asked a few times to make a video like this, and I've made a short form video on TikTok, but I wanted to make something that you could follow along even if you've never drawn before. So this video is split up into two parts. One part is going to be for exactly that, if you're somebody who wants to get into drawing but just never has before and you don't know where to start. There's an extremely simplified version of how to draw a portrait, and then the second part of the video is going to be more so if you want to learn proportions and how to from scratch draw any face that you find on Pinterest or any reference image that you are looking to draw. The first part of this video is going to be focusing on value, and the second part is going to be focusing on proportion. So for this first part, we're actually going to be doing a little bit of tracing, which I don't know if that's controversial, but some of the greatest hyper-realistic artists in the world use a projector to put their image on their canvas, and then they draw that image from the projector. You know, it's glorified tracing. So for this first part of this tutorial, we are going to be tracing the line work of our image, which means you have to have an image printed out. You can use like an iPad or a laptop as like a light box and trace that way, but this way is a lot easier and it works pretty well. So you're going to print out an image the size that you want the portrait on the page, and then you're going to shade in the back. Once the back is all shaded in, you're going to you can put it on the page that you want the portrait to be, and then I'm taping it in place, which I would recommend because if it moves around it might mess up the drawing underneath. And then you're going to basically trace all of the lines in the portrait that you see that you want transferred to the back. Basically what this does is as the pressure from the pencil gets pushed down on the lines that you're making, the shading that you did on the back of the paper gets transferred to the paper that you're working on. So I'm just tracing all of the lines, and then I'm going to lift it up and you can see these light pencil marks. I'm just going to darken those up by going over them again with a pencil, just making the lines more defined. Once you have the harsher lines in there, you're going to want to put in the darkest shadows. So her hair is one of the darkest values, her eyebrows, irises, nostrils, and her lips. That's all of the darkest values in the portrait, so I'm going to just shade those in first. I wanted this tutorial to be two-part because doing a portrait like this will teach you so much about value while still giving you enough confidence to finish the portrait. When you have a sketch that looks so similar to the drawing that you're trying to complete, it helps you with confidence to be able to finish it, and it also teaches you where the values go on a face that looks the way you want it to already. And once you complete a few drawings like this where you're focusing on where the shadows go, you can then focus on perspective and proportions of drawing a face without first stenciling it in, and that'll be the second part of this video. So something that you have to keep in mind kind of the whole time you're drawing is not to rely on what you think a face is going to look like. You really want to be very tied to the reference image that you're using. All of the shaded points, I would just follow very closely what the reference image has. So for example, in this reference image, her top corners of her lips are darker than her bottom lip, and then the bottom edge of her bottom lip is darker. So I'm just shading that in here. Notice also you don't really want to focus on being like hyper realistic. It's really about capturing these shadows and these lights so that your eye can do the rest. The hyper realistic stuff can come later. You don't really need to do all of that for your eye to recognize what the image is, or even recognize who the person that you're trying to draw is. I used to be so afraid to draw teeth, but I feel like they're not too bad if you don't overthink them. The most important thing to remember is the teeth are always behind the lips, so they're always going to have some shadow on them. And the shadow gets more concentrated the closer you get to the lips, because the lips are literally sitting on top of the teeth. So I just do a big shadow over it and then a little bit of a darker shadow at the top of the teeth. Her eyes and her eyebrows are the next thing we're going to work on. So she has pretty dark eyes, but we're going to make sure we give her a pupil. Even if her eyes are dark, start with that being the darkest point. And then, because again our eyeball is behind our eyelids, and of course our eyeball is a sphere, there's going to be shadow at the top and the bottom of our irises. So the top and the bottom are going to have more shadow than the two sides. And then her iris has the darkest edge here. And we're going to darken up that pupil. And now that we have like the general shading of her eye, I'm going to just go over the whole thing and make it darker, because she does have dark brown eyes. But so even though I shaded in her whole eye dark, you could still see like a differentiation of the pupil and the outline, because we did that first. We made that the darkest. For the whites of the eye, they are of course bright, but they're still behind this eyelid. So we're going to shadow the top of the eyelid and a bit of the bottom. So with a light hand, you're kind of just making a faint line and blending it down, so it's not a stark white. These shadows is really what makes a portrait look more real and less cartoony. These little shadows that you don't realize when you first are looking at a portrait. Her tear duct is darker. Gonna fill that in like that. And she has these folds in her eyelid, and those are of course very dark. They're at the most shadowed, so we're gonna draw those in darker. And she has her eyelash line down here and her eyelash line up here. We'll do the eyelashes last. So because your eyes are in a socket, like in your skeleton, this whole area is usually darker than your forehead, your cheeks, your nose. So there's usually a shadow from here because of the brow bone, the nose bone, and this eye socket. And then of course on the other side as well, on the bottom and on the inside of the eye. This is like general rule of thumb on every face, but we're going to now tie into what our reference photo has. She has shadow here, lightness here, shadow here, lightness here, and shadow here. But it still stays in this like circular spot in her face. So we're gonna just copy exactly that. She has shadow here, we're gonna give her some shadow. And with a light hand, because you can always add more, but it's harder to take away. Also picturing that her eye is like a ball behind this helps it so that you see the end of her eyeball is what makes this shadow underneath her skin, and also what makes this crease behind her eyelid. So I think that's fine for the eyelid. I'm gonna add in the eyelashes now. Just gonna follow like the pattern. You could sharpen your pencil if you want. Some people don't even draw in eyelashes. I always feel like it makes a big difference. And eyelashes go, they flick outwards towards the end of the eye. They flick almost like one goes this way and one goes this way in the middle. And then on the inside of the eye, they go the opposite way. So that's it for one eye. I'm gonna do that on the next. And just to kind of reinforce, I'll go over what we're looking at on the reference image. We're gonna follow the shadows on our reference
The darkest shadow is probably right here, and right here, and right here. So let's fill those in first. Once we have like a starting point, it's so much easier to view it as like darkest, medium tone, and lightest tone, the highlight tone. Okay, so now we'll do the same thing starting with the iris. We're gonna give her a pupil, and then the top of the iris is shaded from the eyelid, and then a little bit of the bottom. And then the edges have a pretty harsh shadow. And now we'll fill in the rest. Next step is doing the whites of the eye, making a light line and blending it down very lightly, just to show that that eye is behind the eyelid. All right, and now we're going to do the eyebrows, which is pretty easy. We're just drawing in little hairs. They're much more sparse towards the beginning of the brow, and they kind of all usually go towards the middle like this. And then towards the, like this part of the brow, the middle of it, it's usually pretty dark, pretty full. And then follow the way they are growing. These are growing down. And this is the side of her face. So the eyebrow is going towards, we're kind of losing the view of it from the front of her face. And so you just want to kind of imagine that as you're drawing it, so it's not like this flat eyebrow on the page. Now I'm going to work on her nose, starting off with the darkest part, which is the underneath of her nose. Nostril shape, for some reason, like really makes it so that a person is recognizable. I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but I feel like when I mess up the nostril shape, it's very like easy to make it look not like the person that I was trying to draw anymore. From the insides of the nostril, you're gonna drag down until the bottom of the nose. And this, with hers, you don't have like a direct line, but some people, if you are looking at their face straight on, it'll have like a connected line here. And so you just have to look at whatever face you're drawing. She has a shadow a little bit in between her nose, and then she has like a little bit of like a button nose. So this whole shape here is lighter than the two sides and the bottom. So I'm just gonna do like a very light shadow over the whole shape. See, I actually messed up her I messed up her nostril as I was talking about it. So she has a little bit of a shadow in the like middle of her nose, and then she has a shadow above one of her nostrils, and below the nostril and the side usually has a shadow. So we're gonna fill that in. So you kind of always, no matter what you're working on, you're gonna work on darkest, medium tone to lightest. So she has a few little light, like mid-tone shadows, and those kind of surround the ball of her nose and the sides. So I'm very lightly sketching in where those would be. And then under her nose, because her nose is three-dimensional, of course, there is always a little bit of a shadow under the nose. I shouldn't say always ever, because lighting affects all of this. And there's usually a little bit of a shadow in between both eyebrows. All right, and then I'm going to kind of shade over the whole thing, and then I'm gonna do a little bit of erasing. Now, with where the highlights are, this is like cheating a little bit, but I like the way it looks. I'm just going to erase where the highest points are. And then I don't know if everyone should do this, but I lightly outline the highlights just so that like your eye sees them easier. This isn't the most realistic technique, but I like it. I think it looks cute. Now we are drawing a head. So always remember how three-dimensional things are. Of course, the face is the focal point, but the sides of the head are going to be darker because they are behind this focal point because it's three-dimensional. And her neck is going to be darker because it's below her head. Also, because of the way our skeleton works, usually people have some darker shadows over here, depending on how sharp their cheekbones are, will be how drastically darker it will be. There's also going to be a shadow underneath the lip because this lip is protruding past the chin. And then the highest points of the face are the right here, I guess underneath the eyes and at the cheekbones, the forehead, the chin, and usually the like top of the upper lip. So we're going to try to keep those parts the lightest. We're going to keep a very light hand when shading in the face, but we're going to start with the darkest points, which is usually the edges of the side of the face. So we're going to give that a little bit of a shadow, very light still, and then a little bit darker towards the bottom of the cheekbones. The edge of the chin has a little bit of a shadow, not a harsh line or anything, so we're going to have a very light hand in drawing that. And her Cupid's bow. So she has shadow right here underneath her nose, above her lip. And then because the Cupid's bow has two high points where the top of her lip is, those are going to be highlights. And then next to the highlights is a little bit of a shadow. Very light hand with all of this. Looks like a mustache right now, but we're going to fill in the rest of this area with some color, so it'll connect, I promise. Make sure that as we add shadow, we don't lose, it doesn't become flat with what we already added. So if this mid-tone becomes the same as what's supposed to be our darkest tone near the eyes, just darken up whatever that shadow is. So over here is supposed to be darker than over here, so we're gonna just add in a little bit more shadow. And then she has blush on, so I'm gonna do a very light wash over her whole cheek, like this, avoiding that high cheekbone under the eye area. Okay, and then the sides of her head, she has hair covering, but of course her head is, spherical, so the sides are gonna have more shadow. A lot of people have shadow from their nostrils to their corner of the lips. This woman barely has any, so I'm gonna do like the faintest little bit of shadow in that line. Now we'll do her neck. Again, not trying to draw any strong lines, any harsh lines. We're gonna just give the shadow from below her head. And the sides of her neck are gonna be darker than the middle of her neck. I'm gonna make this a little bit darker. We want it to be very obviously below her head. And her ears are also behind, so they're gonna have more shadow. I'm not good at drawing hair, so I'll show you how I draw hair, but it's always very extremely low effort. I'm not gonna lie. I avoid drawing hair, like at all costs. The most important thing though with this still is to get the shape and shadow right. So if you look at your reference, just show like where the hair's coming from. So I just do a few hairs here and there around her face. I can't even tell where her hair is coming from. I don't know, this is like so not how you draw hair, but this is how I do it because I hate doing it. I guess like if you really want to, I would watch someone else's YouTube video about how to draw hair specifically. I feel like I can draw portraits. Hair, I don't feel like I have the authority to teach. All right, so that's number one, how to draw a portrait in like the most easy way that I can think of and give you. So now we will do another one, but focus on proportion, which means that we're not doing any tracing, and all of the same values apply to the portrait one. So I'm just going to show you like how to get the perspective and how to sketch it out, and then I'm going to fill in the values off camera, and then I'll show you both side by side.
So now we're going to talk about proportions. This is going to be the reference image that I'm using. I got it from Pinterest. I will link it down below if you want to draw the same portrait. I'm going to warn you, there's a lot all at once at the beginning of this. The general faces follow pretty much the same proportions, so I'm just going to repeat what those proportions are. I always start off with a slightly curved vertical line down the center of the face, or where the face is going to go, and then again a slightly curved horizontal line in the middle of that vertical line. And you want it to be angled whichever way the face is turned. So her face is turned slightly to the right, and so you can see that these lines are curved slightly to the right. Bear with me as I try to explain this, but I'm putting a circle with that cross kind of in the middle of it, and then we're going to work on the eyes. They say that your head from like one ear to the other is about 5 eye lengths apart. So I put 1 eye length, quote unquote, in the middle of the face, and then I work my way out, and so I make what I think the eye lengths will be for the actual eye. And then the bottom of that circle is going to be where the bottom of the nose is, and then from the bottom circle to where the chin would be, the halfway point would be where your lip line is. I'm also making these other 2 vertical lines in between where the eyes are going to go, because that's where your corners of your mouth goes. They say that the line should be from your pupil line going down. That should be where the corners of your lips are. So now I'm just drawing in the curvature. I'm following what the reference shows of the bottom of her top lip, where her cupid's bow is. I'm kind of just like getting some lines in there so that it looks more like a face, and then I'll add more and more details as it goes forward. So it's mainly those proportion lines. I feel like I went through that really quickly. That was accidental. I didn't draw it slow enough. But we are going to be very tied to our reference image. So here I'm just putting at the bottom of her nose where her nostrils are, and then I'm putting the irises. This is something, I don't know if that's how everyone does it, but in order for me to like get the eyes not looking like one's a lazy eye, I put the irises in first, and then I draw where the eyelids are going to go. So I do that circle part of wherever it shows in the reference image, and then I do a curved line over top for where the eyelid goes. I'm drawing in her general face shape. I usually correct this as I draw, but it does help to kind of see where everything else goes if you have like the general shape of everything. And then I'm going to add in more detailed lines, so I'm following the shape of her eyelid on the top and the bottom, and I'm just sketching that in on both eyes. So once I have generally like where everything's gonna go, then I focus on one part at a time. So I usually do one eye at a time. I'm doing drawing in her eyelids and where her eyelash lines are gonna go, and the little wrinkles under her eyes, and where her brow bone is going to go, where her nose bone is going to go, and all of this is very dependent on your reference image. So if you think about how we did the first portrait, when we drew on top of the image, we drew in all of the harshest lines so that when we picked up the image, we could basically have a good template of what to draw, all of like the shadows to fill in basically. So when you're drawing from scratch, you still want to do the same thing, you just don't have the image to draw on top of. So you have to use your eyes to stare at the reference image and then copy that line onto your paper, look back at the reference image, copy the next line, and you just want to make sure you have enough that you can start filling in the shadows and you have enough information on the paper already that it looks like a face. So now at this point I'm drawing in the nose, and I start off always with the nostrils. Like I said, I think that getting the nostrils right really helps it look like whatever we're trying to make it look like. So drawing those in, and then the next thing I draw in is the skin around the nostrils, so those two corners next to the nose. I usually draw the little ball of the nose next, so that when I'm drawing the nose bridge, I can remember that it kind of bumps out for that high point. Another proportion to keep in mind is that the corner of your eyes, so where your tear duct is, should align with the corner of your nostrils. So that's another thing to check. If you have a very proportional face, it'll look very like appealing to the eye. So if you can get the proportions right, that makes like the world of a difference. If you ever look at a drawing and you're like, oh, the eyes are too far apart, or, you know, the forehead's too big, like most of the time it's because it wasn't drawn in complete proportion. Now drawing in the details of the lips, I always start off with the defining line that's under the top lip, and I bring that all the way down to the corners of where the mouth is going to be, so where we measured from the middle of where your iris is. And then the top lip, it depends on the person, but in this image, her top lip connects to the corners of her mouth. So I'm drawing in her cupid's bow, the little curved part at the top, and then I'm going to connect those lines to the corners of the mouth lines. With drawing her bottom lip, people don't always have very like definitive lines of where their lip starts and where their skin starts. And in this reference image, she has a very harsh shadow underneath her bottom lip, but at the corners of her bottom lip, it's not super defined. So I just drew in where the bottom part of the lip is, and then I just shaded the rest in, just so that you can see where the lips start and end, but it's not a harsh shadow line. And then I'm going to draw in kind of what we talked about of like her eye socket. This is her nose bridge, her brow bone, and where her eye socket is. So usually there's some definitive shadows in like the inside part of her eyes. And then I'm going to draw in a better face shape. How I do this, I don't know if there's like a perfect way of doing this, but the way that I do it is I look at the reference and I kind of try to measure how far, like for example, her right corner of her eye, how far it is from the edge of her face. And I do that from the nose, from the mouth, from the mouth to the chin. I try to like kind of measure with my eyes how far those things are, and then that's how I draw the outline of the face. I just drew in where the eyebrows go, and I didn't draw it in, I wish I had, but I kind of like visualize a diagonal line from the outer corner of her eye, the inner corner, and the center, and that's where I put the arch, and that's where I begin the eyebrow, and that's where I end the eyebrow. I think that's pretty much it for the sketch of this portrait. I wish that I talked during drawing. I feel like I would have been able to explain it a little bit better. Maybe I'll do a live stream in the future where I could speak step by step with you guys. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm just going to shade this in a little bit more. But that's it for this week's video. I hope you enjoy, and if you do, please subscribe and leave a comment.